Hello there. Hello there, everyone. Mark here from a rather cold and dark London. So I'm the first speaker on this transatlantic leg, and I'm delighted to be taking part in NewMR again. I'd like to echo my thanks to Ray and the team for putting this together, because it really is one of the great factors behind the innovation that we see around the world in market research. So thank you to all of those. What I want to talk about today is something that's slightly against the grain for NewMR. I want to talk about some old stuff, not in a sort of curmudgeonly things ain't what they used to be kind of way, not in a way that young people today have got it all wrong kind of way either. I want to talk about some of the things which are the abiding truths of market research, or abiding issues that we could do well to hold on to, I think, in as we explore all these new technologies and insights from the behavioural and cognitive sciences, and somehow deal with the explosion of data. I try to preface what I'm going to say today by the following, and that is, I am a really big fan, and I've been one of those voices shouting for at least a decade in and around the research and insights community for innovation to take advantage of these new things and challenging the existing models and practices. So I'm far from negative on them. However, in my role as speaker and all-purpose entertainer, as Andrew suggested, I find myself sitting in conferences and reading papers and reading books about the exciting new world. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in WAMA, and we've just finished wrapping the IPA Excellence Diploma first major stage. It's the UK's foremost advertising professional qualification. And here's the thing: I just think that with all the excitement and flurry of innovation, that we might lose track of the things that keep us safe in the way that we do what we do. Let me explain a little bit. Can I have control, please? There we are. And I'm going to today, I'm going to be very bold and use the metaphor of Doctor Who. Now, I feel confident now that many of our American chums will recognise Doctor Who. This is a television show that has been with me all of my life. 50th anniversary just a couple of weeks ago, and they managed to have the world's largest simulcast to 70 million people, including BBC America, I think, had their highest ratings ever for it. So well done. And here are 11 actors who played this single part. And that's a great thing from a TV producer's perspective about this show, Doctor Who, is that it's one character and who gets to regenerate when the actor's a bit bored, or the audience is a bit bored of the actor. And so they've regenerated any number of times. And there's a new one on the way at Christmas, which is very exciting. Now, thinking about the Doctor series, the long line of Doctors you see here, it's clear that they're all Doctor Who, but at the same time, each new one brings something new and interesting and relevant and topical to the table, but they're all Doctor Who. They're all still Time Lords. They all come from Gallifrey. Most of them have a sonic screwdriver. Most of them are slightly irascible, and they have an unreasonable love of humanity and planet Earth. They also have abiding enemies. This is the foremost enemy. This is the Daleks, a Dalek, and as such, I think that it's worth just holding on to that metaphor. I'll slip a few Doctor Who visuals and ideas into the next few points to think about the things that don't change as much as the things that do change. So, 5 abiding MR truths, 5 different Daleks. Who'd have thought? So the first thing I wanted to share with you, and this is just starting in the first place that I landed in pondering this subject, is an issue that I think has already been touched on a couple of times today, and I bet Colin will talk about it later on in the session, and that's this idea that data is somehow the beginning and end of everything. The answer is not, as we all know, in the data. It's very easy to imagine the days of big data, of cheap data collection, and cheap data analysis and storage, that the data is everything. It makes a lot of sense to a very scientist friendly management cadre that somehow, as long as we get the data, then we'll be able to make the perfect decision. And I just don't think this is the case. And market researchers always recognise this. Now I'm going to pick on somebody now, as an innocent market researcher who's done a job for Deloitte's in the US, a simple survey asking US shoppers about their purchase intentions, the channels they anticipate using most in this year's holiday season. And it seems a bit unfair to pick on them, but this story was going round and round, not just this survey, but many other surveys when I was in the States 2 weeks ago, and everyone was citing a particular number. In this case, the number happened to be 47. So 47% of those in the survey, when asked, identified online as the most, likely to be the most popular source of stuff. Now that number in itself is interesting, but it's quite easy to get fixated by it. What we need to do in order to make sense of it is to know what other numbers contextualize it, what kind of thing this is, what kind of patterns lie beneath it, what other options are there, how rapidly this has been changing, how reliable survey data is in predicting actual behavior. We could do a comparison with previous years, for example. We could compare it with other sources and so on. And that's precisely what the great winner of the 2010 presidential election teaches us as good market researchers. This is from Nate Silver's 538 blog for the New York Times, which is, I think, gives us a clue as to where we need to go. You'll notice on here there isn't a single percentage. Now, pollsters love percentages, and some great people in US and in the UK and all around the world who conduct and analyze polls, and they look at the number, the specific number. What's more important, and I think Silver gets this absolutely right, as you see on the left, this is an extrapolated outcome as opposed to the number. And on the right-hand side, you see the probability of victory for the blue or the red candidate. I think both of those things are things that we need to get back to putting back into our use, our reporting of data in particular. They show us the data itself doesn't tell us everything. It's what we do with the data that really matters. And it would be good to bring that back center. There's so much data out there. It's making sense of it that really helps us add value to folks. Now let's get straight to the big data thing for my second point. More data does not mean better data, and more data does not mean better insights. It's a kind of an unspoken assumption that if only we had the complete data set, then we could understand better, or interpret better, or predict better the behavior that we're asked to study and report on and indeed predict. Nassim Taleb, the author of Black Swan and Anti-Fragile, makes a really good point here. He talks about what every social scientist who works at scale knows, that the more data points you have, the more noise you have, and therefore the harder it is to hear the signal. And our job ultimately is to detect the signal and to make sense of it for our clients and colleagues. The signal being the stuff that's left after you take away all of the error. In the past, in traditional market research, we've used probability sampling as a way in surveys and some behavioral studies to understand what level of error we've got, and therefore to look at the number in context and see whether it's a reliable number. We'll start to look at it in context, compare it to other numbers and so on. It's very hard in a world of survey monkey, or indeed of big data, to know what margin of error you got. We have to do quite a lot of work to do it. And it seems, as so often with a world in which things are free, that because it's free, it must be valuable. And it's not by any means the case. Can I just ask you to think of this visual the next time you look at data that has not been collected using one of these traditional methods, and ask yourself, is this subprime data? I've been very taken in the last 2 years, things that we can do to make sense of poor data sets and indeed very big data sets, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But I just wanted to suggest to all of us as a community that no matter how many times you slice, dice, and remix poor data set, it's still a poor data set. And we need to take account of that and not imagine that just because we've been clever with a poor data set, that necessarily we are on firm ground. Subprime data, the headline there to hold in the conversation. And I think related to this is a very interesting phenomenon I've observed any number of times recently with my my clients and colleagues, which is the feeling that because the cost of collecting data is zero, because the cost of storing data is zero, because the cost of analysing data is virtually zero, that we should collect every kind of data we want. We should measure anything that seems important. This is as true of a big data study which involves a lot of transaction stuff and a simple advertising research study, evaluation project. Be careful what you measure, I'd say, because the more you measure, the more data you've created, and the more likely you are to be in this land again, where you've got an oversupply of rubbish data. You've got just too much stuff to make any sense of. And a lot of it will be irrelevant to what you're trying to measure. Again, thinking about advertising research, if you believe that advertising, for example, or a particular kind of advertising, might work primarily through the impact it has on respondents' emotions, then why bother measuring the straightforward cognitive stuff? If you believe that awareness is important, then measure that and less of the other stuff. Point being, just be careful not to measure everything. Mike Hall, many years ago, with Doug McLean, his famous paper that Market Research cited that led to the foundation and the Hall and Partners approach, identified the key measures for different models of advertising research. I think we need to follow that basic discipline again, and not just measure anything we can, anything that moves. When it comes to social media measurement and evaluation, I think this is a really big deal, because just because you can measure a click, or you can measure a like, doesn't mean it's necessarily important. Perhaps we'll come on to that in a moment. Yeah, okay, and this is another almost spurious Doctor Who visual here. This is the great Tom Baker, who I guess is probably my Doctor of choice. That's Doctor number 4 in the history of the Doctors. The point being here is I'm trying to get Tom to as an excuse to talk about is this: we cannot forget things that we know. It's really hard once you've measured something and created data on it for it not to become important and confuse the conversation. Might just measure it just in case at some point in the future it could turn out to be useful. No, don't. Because somebody will look at it and seem to need to use it as part of the story. This is the inability to distinguish between good and bad data, if you like, between the subprime and the quality data. Fourth thing then, when you're thinking about collecting and analysing and reporting data, it's really important to be clear what your assumptions are about the world. It's really important how you see things and the ideas you use to measure it. Now, many of you will have heard me talk recently or read work that I've written about making sense of patterns in big data to determine what choice styles lie beneath. And so this is one that presented, I think, 2 years ago now at NEOMAR, and originally 7 years ago, nearly 7 years ago, started using this stuff. This is a very simple comparison of patterns you might see in data which tell you whether you've got independent choice or copying. Now that's my obsession, as those people have heard me talk before. Independent choice or copying, the fact that copying and social learning is such an important part of our lives and not yet accounted for very much in our common sense and models and our established practices. The idea underneath this is that people are much more likely to be copying than we imagine, so we need to split the data. That's the going-in idea there. It's kind of pattern recognition that was developed by a number of people working in the space of a confluence of a number of different social sciences, not least my co-authors, and I'll have what she's having, Professor Alex Bentley of Bristol University and Professor Mike O'Brien of Missouri. And those two have some archaeological backgrounds. This is Mike's background in particular here. His speciality is the understanding through the archaeological record how particular things are spreading, arrowhead designs are spreading through North America prior to the Europeans arriving. Now, his idea is this social independent, that's his obsession too, that's why we use those patterns. If he was interested in something else, he'd be looking for other patterns. But he needs to know that that's what he's looking for before he starts, and then find the patterns of it. Not just go any old pattern, or indeed just hope that somehow the data will yield up the truth. Very often, though, I've got to say that our ideas don't, however useful they might seem to be in collecting research, can actually lead us astray. So this is one that we see a lot in social media marketing and evaluation. The idea of fandom. These are Doctor Who fans at I think it's a Comic-Con or one of those fan conventions. The idea of the fan being really, really important is something that's the heart of the word of mouth marketing associations practices, and it's a default setting for many in digital. However, many other people in mainstream marketing follow the line of Professor Andrew Ehrenberg and Byron from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute in Australia. All their work points again and again and again the idea of the super loyal people accounting for much volume and much influence. Really not very helpful. So just be aware, if that's your idea, it is your idea, that's fine. But be aware that the data, when you approach the data, you'll be using this idea to understand the data, to understand how you might collect the data, what data you collect, and then interpreting it. So just be aware of the ideas that you go in. The data itself is neutral in some senses, I guess, until you collect it. But the ideas themselves can help you see things that you expect to see or not. And the final thing, and this is a set of themes which I've already heard of from a number of people during the previous 3 sessions in the MR. I'm sure that we'll hear more later on today. And this is the idea of how you present stuff being really, really important. I wrote a paper some years ago called When We Used to Love When Bob, that's Bob Worcester, the famous pollster based in the UK, formerly chief of Maury, he predicted, Bob called it for Kerry when Bob Worcester predicted that Senator Kennedy would win the 2004 presidential election in the US. Now, I was pointing out then that it's how we present data that's the pretty big opportunity, rather than necessarily the methodology we use to collect or analyze it, which is what many of the researchers think. One side of this is the storytelling thing. This is Stephen Moffat. He's the showrunner for Doctor Who nowadays. He's both chief writer and producer and money man and extraordinary creative talent, finding to keep the story going across a number of platforms around the world and so on. Extraordinary man, and keep it fresh and interesting and so on. But storytelling is only part of how we use the data to make our points. So another side of it here is, this is my personal marketing science hero. This is Andrew Ehrenberg, the late Andrew Ehrenberg, who died a couple of years ago. And he's known to many people for his work on loyalty and purchase patterns and stuff like that. I'm not citing him here because of that. I'm citing him here because he was a fantastic statistician, and to many people outside marketing science, he's known best for his work on how do you present large amounts of data. And he could teach us any number of things in this space. The first of which is he tries to avoid rounding wherever possible, because he says spurious detail distracts the eye and the mind away from the underlying patterns. So he's very keen to have at most 1 decimal point of rounding. Secondly, he talked about ordering data in such a way that it made sense to the viewer, to either reflect their views of how things were or reflect the underlying structure which you were trying to. It's very worth reading a number of his articles. There's one that comes up very quickly on Google, which is from the American Journal of Statistics in 1991, which makes his basic points. It's absolutely beautiful and incredibly useful stuff. The more data we have, the more important it is to understand how you present it. And but excuse me for a moment, I'm just going to blow my own trumpet here. I'm rather pleased with this map that Professor Bentley and I created, and is the heart of I'll Have What She's Having, which shows 4 different choice styles, each of which is characterized by patterns in data, like some of the things we've seen before. Very, very complicated models of behavior described at a level that anyone can engage with them. Now, every time we present this, people take a little while to make sense of it, and so I'll leave it on the screen for a moment. I don't need you to understand it in great detail. What I do need to understand is that it gives you a start. It gives you a start in understanding how people choose and what the data is telling you about a particular brand, really map it there, or a particular behavior. And it allows you to have conversations. Now, whenever we work with marketing folk, or insights folk, or research folk, there's a desire to nuance this slightly. So couldn't we add another dimension here, or could we distinguish between two versions of a particular quadrant? You go, absolutely, you can. Interesting, the same thing as happens whenever we publish in academic journals. So there's a version of this paper by Professors Bentley and O'Brien, and the extraordinarily brilliant Buzz Brock, who American economist, who's based in the Midwest, in brain and behavior science at the moment, and all of the commentary from all kinds of social scientists and those with an academic interest in this area making sense. Can we make it more nuanced? Well, of course you can, but can you present really complex information in a way that's actually understandable to people really quickly, and to do so in a way which makes them feel confident rather than gives them a migraine? So, and one last thing, I'm actually doing a lot of work at the moment also in a particular category, and that's in energy and energy efficiency and the communication of information around energy efficiency. And this wonderful device is a device that's intended to communicate quite complex energy usage information to ordinary everyday folk going about their lives. This is called a Kyoto Watson, DIY Kyoto Watson. So it's a new kind of device, or a relatively new kind of device for communicating quite complex energy usage information so you can respond to it usefully. I think this is the kind of way that we going to have to start thinking about the data that we collect, analyze, curate, and report on. Something as tangible as this, rather than something that exists in text form alone. Anyway, that's a pointer to the future. I guess what comes out of this is not that we should abandon our innovation in market research, methodologies, and analytic techniques and reporting styles. I think the market research community is one of the most innovative in the marketing services world. I think compared to the creative businesses that whose work we sometimes get asked to evaluate, we are way ahead, and we should be very proud of that. I think we should carry on doing this innovation, but maybe it's time to just be aware of some of these things which we learned in the past to our own cost. So what is a new technique, a new insight, a new technology may seem, as the young people say, amazeballs. Let's just ask ourselves some of these basic things about, are we thinking just the data's telling us the answer, or are we allowing ourselves to be taken up with the data or the appearance of data? Is just the sheer volume of data and the cleverness of our ability to collect and store and analyze large amounts of data pleasing us? Are we overexcited by maybe things we could measure now, and we can measure now? Are we aware of the ideas that we're using to impose on the data and understand the data by? And are we actually understanding how our users are going to interpret what we've got, and doing our best to help them understand what we're delivering to them? This face here is the new Doctor. I'm very excited by him. I'm very excited by the new market research world that's unfolding. I think it's the most exciting time to be in market and marketing research. But maybe we ought to keep hold of the things that we've learned along the way. And if those 5 things are helpful to you, then thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you.